Welcome to another episode of Literary Landscapes, where we delve deep into the lives and legacies of the literary giants who shaped our world. Today, we're journeying back to the late 18th and early 19th centuries, into the drawing rooms and country estates of Georgian England, to explore the remarkable life and enduring works of an author whose wit, irony, and profound understanding of human nature continue to captivate readers centuries later. Jane Austen. When you think of Jane Austen, what comes to mind? Is it the passionate dance between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, the meddling charm of Emma Woodhouse, or perhaps the quiet resilience of Anne Elliot? Her novels are beloved for their keen observations of society, their unforgettable characters, and their timeless exploration of love, class, and personal growth. But behind these masterpieces was a woman whose own life, though seemingly modest, was just as rich with quiet determination, sharp intellect, and a profound commitment to her craft. She wasn't some isolated genius. She was a woman deeply embedded in her family and community, who transformed the novel from something largely sentimental into a vehicle for piercing social realism. Born in 1775, in the tranquil, rural Hampshire village of Steventon, Jane Austen spent her entire life within the world of the English gentry. Now, when we say gentry, it's easy to imagine vast wealth and sprawling estates, but for many, including the Austens, it meant a respectable social standing without immense financial security. This distinction is absolutely crucial to understanding her life and her work. Her father, Reverend George Austen, was an Anglican clergyman who supplemented his modest church income by farming and running a small boarding school for boys. This wasn't a family rolling in money, but they were rich in intellect, literature, and the arts. Imagine this household: 8 children, constantly surrounded by books, staging plays, reading aloud to one another. It sounds like a vibrant, boisterous, and incredibly stimulating environment. This early immersion in storytelling and performance must have been a crucible for Jane's developing wit and narrative voice. It's here, amidst this lively family, that she forged an unbreakable bond with her older sister. Cassandra wasn't just a sister. She was Jane's closest confidant, her sounding board, and the recipient of almost all of Jane's surviving letters. These letters are invaluable, offering us the only real windows into Jane's private thoughts and feelings, especially since Cassandra, perhaps out of a protective instinct, later burned or censored many of them. Now, a fascinating detail about her early life, one that might seem a little strange to us today, is that shortly after being weaned, Jane was sent to live with a local villager, Elizabeth Cawley, for about 18 months. This was a common practice at the time, adopted to relieve the mother of the immediate burden of a growing infant. It speaks to the practicalities of a large household and the realities of childcare in the 18th century. But she returned to the rectory, back to her bustling family, and her formal education, while brief by modern standards, was exceptionally rich in its own way. In 1783, she and Cassandra were sent to Oxford, and then to Reading Abbey Girls' School. But the real treasure trove of her education wasn't in formal institutions. It was right there in her father's extensive library. Reverend Austen, recognizing his daughter's keen mind, gave her free rein to read widely. She devoured everything from history and philosophy to contemporary fiction and poetry. This wasn't just passive reading, it was active engagement, a deep absorption that fueled her understanding of human nature and the literary landscape of her time. Think of it. A young girl, surrounded by books, with the freedom to explore any world she chose. It's the kind of intellectual nourishment many aspiring writers would dream of. This intellectual freedom quickly manifested in her own writing. Her earliest surviving writings date back to 1787, when she was just 11 years old. These are known as the Juvenilia, a collection of short stories, poems, and plays she wrote primarily to entertain her family. And let me tell you, these aren't just cute childhood scribblings. The Juvenilia are remarkable for their wit, their incisive satire, and their brilliant mockery of the popular literary trends of the period. While sentimental, highly emotional romances were all the rage, Jane was penning humorous parodies. She delighted in creating dramatic, flawed, and often hilariously drunk characters. Works like Love and Friendship, with that intentional misspelling, mind you, and A History of England, by a partial ignorant and prejudiced historian, showcase her early mastery of irony and her ability to critique societal hypocrisies. Even as a teenager, she had a keen eye for the social intricacies of rural life, a skill that would become the cornerstone of her masterpieces. It was during this period that her unique narrative voice, that blend of sharp observation and subtle humor, truly began to take shape. As she transitioned from her teenage years into her early 20s, Austen began to shift from these lighthearted parodies to more structured, full-length novels. Between 1795 and 1798, she completed early versions of 3 of her most famous books. The first, Eleanor and Marianne, an epistolary novel, would eventually become Sense and Sensibility. Immediately after, she wrote First Impressions, which we now know as Pride and Prejudice. And in 1798, she penned a satirical piece originally titled Susan, which was eventually published posthumously as Northanger Abbey. It's fascinating to think about these early versions. They weren't born fully formed. They were works in progress, undergoing revisions and refinements. This shows us the dedication and the iterative process of her creativity. Her father, Reverend Austen, was so convinced of First Impressions that he attempted to secure a publisher for it in 1797. He sent a letter to a prominent London publisher, Thomas Cadell, and what happened? Cadell returned the letter unread, rejecting the book before even seeing it. Can you imagine the disappointment? An early rejection, a brushes off that might have deterred a lesser writer. But Austen, undeterred, continued to write, revise, and hone her craft. This resilience, this quiet persistence in the face of setbacks, is a defining characteristic of her life. Now, let's talk about her personal life, particularly her romantic experiences, because they deeply echo the themes of courtship and societal pressure that are so central to her novels. Like many of her heroines, Austen belonged to the gentry, but her family wasn't wealthy. Financial hardship was a recurring shadow in her life. In Georgian England, a woman's financial security and social standing were inextricably linked to marriage. It wasn't just about love. It was about survival, about securing a future. In 1795, a young Irishman named Tom Lefroy visited Hampshire and spent time with the Austen family. Jane and Lefroy engaged in a lively flirtation, attending local balls and gatherings. It sounds like a charming, budding romance. But Lefroy's family intervened, quickly recognizing that a marriage to the relatively poor Jane Austen would be imprudent, and swiftly sent him away to London. Lefroy would go on to become the Lord Chief Justice of Ireland, and in his old age, he admitted he had indeed been boyish in love with Austen. It's a poignant what-if in her story, a glimpse of a potential love thwarted by the harsh realities of social and economic expectations. It's a real-life example of the very dilemmas her characters face. Austen received only one formal marriage proposal in her entire life. In December 1802, while visiting her close friends, the Bigwither family, at Manydown Park, she received a proposal from Harris Bigwither, the brother of her friends. Harris was wealthy, which would have meant financial security not only for Jane but also for her mother and sister Cassandra. This was a weighty consideration, a path to security for her entire immediate family. Austen initially accepted, but after a night to sleep on the decision, she changed her mind the following morning. She realized she did not love him and retracted her acceptance. This was a bold decision, particularly for a woman of her socioeconomic status. It emphasized her profound belief that marriage should be founded on genuine affection, not merely on economic convenience. This wasn't just a personal choice, it was a statement, a reflection of the very values she championed through her heroines, who often navigate the treacherous waters between societal expectations and the dictates of their own hearts. The early 1800s brought significant changes and challenges to Jane's life. In 1801, her father, Reverend George Austen, made the sudden and unexpected decision to retire from his clerical duties in Steventon. He relocated his family, himself, his wife, Jane, and Cassandra, to the bustling city of Bath. For the Austen women, who had spent their entire lives in the quiet rural countryside, this move was a profound cultural shift. Bath, in the early 1800s, was a fashionable resort town, a vibrant hub teeming with social activities, balls, concerts, theater visits. It was a stark contrast to the tranquility of Steventon. Jane spent about 10 years in Bath, moving between various lodgings. While the city's vibrant social life undoubtedly provided her with a wealth of material and inspiration for her later novels, you can see its influence especially in Northanger Abbey and Persuasion. She wasn't particularly happy there. She found the city's social scene exhausting and often longed for the peace of the countryside. This tension between the bustling social world and her yearning for quiet solitude is another thread that runs through her narratives. There's a brief mention of a potential romantic attachment in Bath, to the Reverend John Blackall, who unfortunately passed away before anything formal could develop. Another what-if in her personal narrative. Tragedy struck the family in January 1805, when Reverend George Austen died suddenly after a brief illness. This was a devastating shock, throwing the family into a precarious financial situation. Reverend Austen's income as a clergyman stopped, and the Austen brothers had to agree to pool resources to support their mother and unmarried sisters. This was the stark reality for women in that era. Without a male provider, financial stability was fragile, often dependent on the goodwill of male relatives. Following her father's death, the three surviving women, Mrs. Austen, Jane, and Cassandra, were forced to rent cheaper living quarters to stretch their limited funds. After a brief period in Bath, they moved to Southampton in 1806, where they lived with Jane's brother Frank and his new wife Mary. Life in Southampton was difficult. They lived in cramped, rented spaces, acutely aware of their reduced circumstances. Despite these difficulties, Jane continued to write, though her productivity had temporarily slowed. During this period, she worked on a new novel titled The Watsons, which she ultimately left unfinished, choosing to focus on editing and revising her earlier drafts, rather than embarking on entirely new projects. These nomadic years in Bath and Southampton were profoundly impactful. Jane experienced firsthand the life of a poor relation, relying on the charity and support of her brothers. These experiences with financial insecurity and dependency deeply informed the nuanced social commentary present in her later works, where the vulnerability of women without independent wealth is frequently explored. Think of the Dashwood sisters in Sense and Sensibility, or Fanny Price in Mansfield Park. Their circumstances are not just fictional constructs, they are echoes of Jane Austen's own reality. She didn't just observe, she lived it. The turning point in Austen's adult life came in 1809, when she, Cassandra, and their mother were offered a permanent, comfortable home in the village of Chawton in Hampshire. This cottage was provided by Jane's wealthy brother Edward, who had been adopted by distant cousins, the Knights, and inherited several large estates, including Chawton House. Moving to Chawton Cottage provided the Austen women with the stability and security Jane so desperately needed to resume her writing in earnest. This period, from 1809 to 1817, is often referred to as her productive years. The household was vibrant and lively, and Austen wrote all of her subsequent novels while living in a corner of the sitting room, often shielding her work in progress from visitors. Imagine that, a literary genius, crafting some of the most celebrated novels in English literature, in a busy sitting room, constantly having to hide her papers. It speaks volumes about her dedication and her ability to carve out a creative space amidst the everyday demands of family life. Despite the lack of absolute privacy, it was here that she found the creative space, time, and focus to revise her early works and create her mature masterpieces. With the stability offered by Chawton, Austen began seeking publication for the novel she had drafted in her youth, Eleanor and Marianne, now titled Sense and Sensibility. Her brother Henry, who was much more involved in the London literary scene, assisted her in acting as a liaison with the London publisher Thomas Egerton. Austen chose to publish the novel anonymously, a common practice for female authors at a time when writing was largely considered an unseemly profession for women. The title page simply read, "By a Lady." This anonymity wasn't just about convention, it was a strategic choice, perhaps to avoid judgment, or to ensure her work was judged on its own merits. She financed the publication herself, agreeing to a profit-sharing arrangement where she took on the financial risk, but retained the rights. Sense and Sensibility was published in late October 1811, and was a modest success. It sold out its first edition by the summer of 1813, bringing Austen both critical praise and her first taste of financial independence from her writing, earning her about £140. This was a significant sum for her, a tangible reward for her years of dedication. Following the success of Sense and Sensibility, Austen retrieved the manuscript she had drafted in 1797 as First Impressions, and began heavily revising it. She retitled the novel Pride and Prejudice. The book was published in January 1813 by Thomas Egerton, once again anonymously, attributed only to the author of Sense and Sensibility. Pride and Prejudice was an immediate and resounding critical and commercial success. The entire first edition sold out within months, and a second edition was commissioned by the autumn of 1813. The novel, which follows the spirited Elizabeth Bennet and the wealthy, brooding Mr. Darcy, cemented Austen's reputation as a masterful chronicler of English life. The character of Elizabeth Bennet remains one of the most beloved heroines in English literature, and for good reason. Her wit, her independence, her journey of self-discovery all resonate so powerfully. Riding the wave of her literary success, Austen immediately began planning her next novel, Mansfield Park. She began drafting the book in early 1811 and finished it by 1813. Mansfield Park was published in May 1814, again by Thomas Egerton. This novel takes a somewhat more serious and moralistic tone than her previous works. It follows the life of Fanny Price, a quiet and principled young girl who is sent to live with her wealthy relatives at their grand estate. The novel explores complex themes of social class, morality, family dynamics, and even the impact of the British Empire, while subtly satirizing the behavior of the landed gentry. The first edition sold well, further establishing Austen's prominence as a writer. Mansfield Park sometimes gets a bad rap for its more reserved heroine, but it's a deeply insightful work that reveals Austen's evolving thematic concerns. In 1814, Austen started working on her fourth published novel, Emma. She completed the manuscript in March 1815 and published it in December of that year, this time through the prominent London publisher John Murray. Emma is widely considered one of Austen's most perfectly crafted novels. It tells the story of Emma Woodhouse, a wealthy, clever, and spoiled young woman who delights in matchmaking. The novel explores themes of self-discovery, class, and the complexities of human relationships, all wrapped in Austen's signature wit. An interesting episode in Austen's career occurred during the publication of Emma. The Prince Regent, who would later become King George IV, was a noted admirer of Austen's novels. While she was visiting her brother Henry in London, the Prince Regent's librarian, James Stanyer Clark, invited Austen to dedicate her next novel to the prince. Austen reluctantly agreed, and Emma was published with a dedication to the Prince Regent. This is a fascinating glimpse into her character. She privately despised the prince for his profligate lifestyle and his poor treatment of his wife, Caroline of Brunswick. Yet she acceded to the request. It shows a pragmatic side, a recognition of the social and professional advantages of such a dedication, even if it chafed against her personal convictions. In 1815, Austen began working on her sixth novel, which she originally titled The Elliots, but was later published as Persuasion. She completed the manuscript in July 1816. Persuasion is a poignant and mature novel that explores themes of second chances and regret. It tells the story of Anne Elliot, a 27-year-old unmarried woman whose family is on the verge of bankruptcy, forcing them to rent their ancestral estate and relocate to Bath. 8 years prior, Anne had been persuaded by a family friend to break off her engagement to a young, penniless naval officer, Captain Frederick Wentworth. When Wentworth returns, now a wealthy captain, Anne must confront the consequences of her past choices and the lingering love between them. It's a beautiful, bittersweet story that many consider her most romantic. In addition to Persuasion, Austen possessed the earlier unpublished manuscript of Susan, which her brother Henry had previously sold to a publisher in 1803 for £10, but which had never been released. In the spring of 1816, Henry bought the copyright back, allowing Jane to revise the manuscript. She planned to publish it, but due to her failing health and eventual death, the novel remained unpublished during her lifetime. It was released posthumously as Northanger Abbey. Tragically, in early 1816, Austen's previously robust health began to decline. While the exact nature of her illness was not definitively diagnosed during her lifetime, modern historians and medical professionals suspect she may have suffered from Addison's disease, a disorder of the adrenal glands, or perhaps a form of lymphoma. Despite experiencing severe fatigue, physical pain, and periods of confinement to her bed, Austen continued to write with remarkable resilience. By early 1817, she even began writing a new novel, The Brothers, which would later be published as Sanditon. This novel featured a satirical take on the rising culture of seaside health resorts, showcasing that her incisive wit and creative faculties remained intact, even as her body failed her. However, her physical condition deteriorated rapidly, and she only completed 12 chapters before she was forced to put her pen down. On April 27, 1817, anticipating that she might not survive, Austen drafted a short will, leaving nearly all of her estate and belongings to her dearest sister Cassandra. Realizing that she required more specialized medical care than was available in Chawton, she and Cassandra moved to lodgings in the cathedral city of Winchester, in May 1817. Despite the best efforts of her doctors, Jane Austen's health continued to fail. She passed away on July 18, 1817, at the age of 41, with her sister Cassandra by her side. 6 days later, on July 24, 1817, she was buried in the north aisle of the nave in Winchester Cathedral. A life cut tragically short, but one that left an indelible mark on literature. Austen's passing marked a profound loss for her family, but it also initiated the public revelation of her literary genius. Prior to her death, Austen had expressed a wish that her unpublished manuscript, Susan, which became Northanger Abbey, be published alongside Persuasion. Following her burial, her brother Henry Austen took charge of her literary estate. He negotiated with the publisher John Murray and successfully arranged for the publication of Northanger Abbey and Persuasion as a 4-volume set in December 1817. Crucially, this posthumous publication included a biographical notice written by Henry. In this notice, Henry revealed for the first time to the reading public that his sister Jane was the anonymous author of Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, and Emma. He paid tribute to her life, character, and literary achievements, finally acknowledging her significant contributions to English literature. It was a moment of public recognition that she, in her lifetime, had largely foregone for the sake of propriety and perhaps a quiet focus on her art. While Austen enjoyed critical and commercial success during the latter half of her life, her true literary legacy grew steadily in the decades following her death. As the 19th century progressed, her novels were continuously read, admired, and praised by prominent literary figures, including Sir Walter Scott and Lord Macaulay. But it wasn't until 1870 that her nephew, James Edward Austen Leigh, published a memoir of Jane Austen, the first full-length biography of the author, compiled by a member of her family. In the memoir, Austen Leigh portrayed his aunt as a good, quiet Aunt Jane, focusing on her domestic virtues, her piety, and her gentle nature. While this biography did much to introduce Austen to a broader Victorian audience, it also contributed to a somewhat romanticized and sanitized view of her life that persisted for many years. It was a lovely, albeit incomplete portrait. Modern biographers and scholars, such as Claire Tomalin in her definitive Jane Austen, A Life, have sought to reassess the author. They present a more nuanced picture of a woman who was acutely aware of her family's precarious financial circumstances, who experienced the frustrations of being a poor relation, and who made deliberate decisions to maintain her independence and pursue her writing above all else. This more complex, resilient, and fiercely independent Austen is the one we recognize today. The woman who chose her art over societal expectations. Let's now pivot to her thematic contributions and literary style, because this is where we truly understand her genius and her transformative impact on the novel. Jane Austen's 6 completed novels occupy a unique and revered place in English literature. Her work is commonly categorized into 3 phases. Her first trilogy, the early drafts of Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, and Northanger Abbey. Her time in Bath and Southampton, where she worked on The Watsons, Lady Susan, and the early thoughts on Persuasion, and her productive Chawton years, where she completed Mansfield Park, Emma, and the final version of Persuasion. This progression shows a steady maturation of her craft and themes. Austen's literary style is marked by several key innovations and characteristics that bridge the gap between 18th century sensibilities and 19th century realism. First, and perhaps most fundamentally, is her commitment to realism and the everyday world. Unlike the Gothic novels that were popular in the late 18th century, think shadowy castles, dramatic heroines, and supernatural elements, Austen chose to set her stories in the realistic, everyday world of the English country gentry. Her novels do not feature exotic locales, dramatic rescues, or supernatural occurrences. Instead, they focus on the domestic sphere, the intricacies of social status, and the daily lives of middle-class families. She famously described her work as depicting 2 inches of ivory, meticulously carved and polished. By focusing on this seemingly small, ordinary world, she demonstrated that the everyday lives of regular people were rich and profound subjects for literary exploration. She showed that the grand dramas of human emotion, morality, and social interaction didn't need a haunted castle. They could unfold just as powerfully in a drawing room. Second, a recurring and central theme in all of Austen's works is the vital importance of marriage for women. In Georgian England, women had very few legal rights. they could rarely inherit property directly, and they certainly couldn't pursue independent careers that would grant them financial security. As a result, securing a marriage with a respectable and financially stable suitor was not just about love, it was often a matter of economic survival. Austen's heroines are constantly forced to navigate the tension between marrying for genuine affection and marrying for financial security. Think of Charlotte Lucas in Pride and Prejudice, marrying Mr. Collins out of practicality. Or the precarious situation of the Dashwood sisters. Austen doesn't judge these choices. She illuminates the societal structures that necessitate them, showing the difficult choices women faced. Third, Austen is considered a pioneer in the use of free indirect discourse. This is a sophisticated narrative technique that blends the third-person voice of the narrator with the inner thoughts and consciousness of a character. It allows the reader to experience the story through the perspective of the heroine, like Elizabeth Bennet or Emma Woodhouse, while still maintaining the ironic distance and subtle wit of the narrator. It's like the narrator is speaking for the character, but in a way that still allows for commentary or a slight wink to the reader. This technique allowed for a deeper psychological exploration of her characters, giving us access to their internal worlds in a way that felt fresh and intimate, and it became a staple of modern literature. It's a key reason why her characters feel so real and three-dimensional. Fourth, Austen's writing is famous for its wit and irony. She uses these tools with surgical precision to satirize the hypocrisies, the social climbing, and the rigid class structures of English society. Her ironic tone is often used to highlight the foolishness of certain characters. Think of the hypochondriac Mr. Woodhouse in Emma, constantly worried about his health, or the sycophantic, absurd Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice, with his obsequious manners and ridiculous proposals. But her irony isn't just for comedic effect. It's also a gentle, yet firm critique of the more serious societal prejudices of the Georgian era, exposing the absurdities and injustices inherent in the system. She could make you laugh, while also making you think. Finally, her novels are essentially Bildungsroman, or coming-of-age stories, centered around character development. Her heroines are rarely perfect at the beginning of the novel. They are often flawed by their own pride, their prejudices, or their misguided assumptions. Elizabeth Bennet's prejudice, Emma Woodhouse's arrogance, Catherine Morland's naivete. These are starting points. The central journey of the plot involves the heroine overcoming these personal flaws, gaining a greater understanding of herself and the world around her, and ultimately recognizing the true worth of a suitable partner. This journey of self-discovery and moral growth is what makes her characters so relatable and enduring. To fully grasp Jane Austen's biography, we must also examine the fictional worlds she created, as they are deeply informed by her own experiences, social observations, and personal philosophies. Let's delve briefly into each of her major completed works. Sense and Sensibility, 1811, her first published novel, explores the contrast between the rational, restrained Elinor Dashwood and her highly emotional, romantic sister, Marianne. After their father's death, the Dashwood sisters and their family are left in reduced financial circumstances, forced to move to a modest cottage. Marianne falls passionately in love with the dashing but unreliable John Willoughby, who eventually abandons her for a wealthier woman, leaving her heartbroken. Meanwhile, Elinor harbors a quiet affection for the reserved Edward Ferrars, who is secretly engaged to another woman. The novel brilliantly balances the virtues of both reason and emotion, ultimately suggesting that a harmonious life requires a careful balance of the two. It's a profound exploration of how we navigate intense feelings with practical realities. Pride and Prejudice, 1813, is perhaps the most famous of all Austen's works. It focuses on the Bennet family, with 5 unmarried daughters and parents obsessed with finding suitable husbands. The arrival of the wealthy Mr. Bingley at nearby Netherfield Park causes great excitement. While Bingley takes an immediate liking to the eldest Bennet daughter, Jane, his arrogant and even wealthier friend, Mr. Darcy, famously slights the second daughter, Elizabeth. This insult sparks Elizabeth's enduring prejudice against Darcy, while Darcy's pride causes him to look down on the Bennet family's lack of social connections and wealth. Through a series of misunderstandings, encounters with the militia, including the charming but deceitful George Wickham, and interference from Darcy's formidable aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, Elizabeth and Darcy gradually overcome their respective flaws and develop a mutual respect and love. The novel remains a timeless critique of social status and the perils of first impressions. It's a masterclass in character interaction and psychological depth. Mansfield Park, 1814, is often considered Austen's most complex and challenging novel due to its quiet, passive, and deeply moralistic heroine, Fanny Price. As a young girl, Fanny is taken from her impoverished home in Portsmouth to live with her wealthy aunt and uncle, Sir Thomas and Lady Bertram, at their grand Northamptonshire estate, Mansfield Park. Throughout her upbringing, Fanny is treated as a poor relation, often reminded of her lower status by her cousins, Maria and Julia, and her Aunt Norris. Only her cousin Edmund provides her with genuine friendship and support. The arrival of the siblings Henry and Mary Crawford disrupts the peace of Mansfield Park, leading to flirtations, a failed amateur theatrical production, and moral compromises. When Sir Thomas leaves to manage his Caribbean estate, the household's morals begin to slip. Ultimately, Fanny's steadfast adherence to her principles and her quiet resilience are rewarded, exploring the theme that true morality and goodness stem from within. It's a powerful statement on integrity in the face of superficiality. Emma, 1815, centers on Emma Woodhouse, a wealthy, intelligent, and independent young woman in the village of Highbury. Confident in her own matchmaking abilities, Emma takes a young, unassuming orphan named Harriet Smith under her wing. Emma attempts to guide Harriet through a series of romantic misadventures, repeatedly meddling in the affections of others and misinterpreting the intentions of those around her. Along the way, she is gently reprimanded by Mr. Knightley, a family friend and her sister's brother-in-law, who recognizes Emma's flaws and arrogance. Emma's journey involves recognizing the disastrous consequences of her matchmaking schemes, discovering her own blindness to the feelings of others, and eventually realizing that she has been in love with Mr. Knightley all along. The novel is widely praised for its perfect structure and its sympathetic exploration of a flawed but ultimately redeemable protagonist. It's a delightful study of self-delusion and eventual enlightenment. Persuasion, 1818, Austen's final completed novel, is often noted for its maturity, melancholy tone, and the depth of feeling between its protagonists. It tells the story of Anne Elliot, a 27-year-old unmarried woman whose aristocratic family is in severe financial trouble due to the extravagance of her father, Sir Walter Elliot. To save money, the Elliots rent their ancestral home, Kellynch Hall, to Admiral and Mrs. Croft, and relocate to Bath. 8 years prior, Anne had been engaged to Frederick Wentworth, a poor and ambitious naval officer. However, she was persuaded by her friend Lady Russell to break the engagement, believing it was an imprudent match. When Captain Wentworth returns, having made his fortune in the Navy, the lingering love between him and Anne is reignited. However, they must navigate the challenges of the past, the interference of Anne's family, and their own pride and misunderstandings before finally reuniting. It's a beautifully rendered story of lost love found again, and the quiet strength of enduring affection. And finally, Northanger Abbey, published posthumously alongside Persuasion, is a brilliant and satirical homage to the Gothic novels that were so popular in the late 18th century. The novel follows Catherine Morland, a young, imaginative, and somewhat naive young girl from a country family. She is invited by her wealthy neighbors, the Allens, to spend the winter season in the fashionable city of Bath. While in Bath, Catherine is introduced to society and meets Henry Tilney, a witty and intelligent young clergyman, and his sister Eleanor. Catherine is befriended by the superficial Isabella Thorpe, who introduces her to Gothic romances, most notably Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho. When Catherine is invited to stay with the Tilney family at their ancestral home, Northanger Abbey, her overactive imagination runs wild, leading her to suspect the Abbey's patriarch, General Tilney, of a sinister crime. The novel is a delightful coming-of-age story in which Catherine must learn to separate reality from the fantastical plots of her favorite books, highlighting the dangers of letting fiction dictate your perception of reality. Jane Austen's contributions to the development of the English novel cannot be overstated. She is widely considered one of the greatest writers in the English language, and her influence extended far beyond her own lifetime, shaping the works of numerous 19th and 20th century literary giants. Writers such as George Eliot, Virginia Woolf, E.M. Forster, and Henry James all drew inspiration from Austen's psychological depth, her masterful command of narrative technique, and her ability to critique society through the lens of domestic life. Virginia Woolf, in particular, highly praised Austen's genius, noting that she was the most perfect artist among women, and marveling at how she achieved such profound effects on a small domestic scale. That 2 inches of ivory had immense depth. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Austen's work has seen a massive resurgence in popularity, not only through academic scholarship, but also through countless adaptations, films, and modern retellings. Novels like Pride and Prejudice have been adapted into numerous stage plays, television series, and films, most notably the iconic 1995 BBC television adaptation and the 2005 Joe Wright film. Additionally, Austen's works have been updated and relocated to modern settings, as seen in films like Clueless, which is a brilliant modern adaptation of Emma, and Bridget Jones's Diary, which is heavily inspired by Pride and Prejudice. This enduring popularity is a testament to the universality of Austen's themes. While the socio-economic conditions of Georgian England have long since passed, the fundamental human emotions, social pressures, romantic entanglements, and personal growth that Austen so brilliantly captured remain as relevant today as they were over 200 years ago. Love, loss, pride, prejudice, the search for connection, the struggle for independence, these are eternal human experiences. Piecing together Jane Austen's exact personal character can be a challenge, largely because her sister Cassandra, as we mentioned, burned and censored many of her letters, and her nephew's biography painted a slightly idealized portrait. However, surviving accounts from her family and the tone of her remaining letters provide a vivid picture of the author. Austen was known to be deeply devoted to her family, particularly her sister Cassandra. She was also very close to her brothers, especially Henry, who acted as her literary agent and was instrumental in her posthumous recognition. She was an affectionate aunt to her many nieces and nephews, frequently writing them letters and entertaining them with stories. This image of a loving, engaged family member contrasts with the solitary, reclusive writer stereotype, showing her embeddedness in her community. Physically, Austen was described as being attractive, with bright hazel eyes and curly brown hair. She was known to be an excellent dancer and enjoyed participating in the local assemblies and balls held in Hampshire and Bath. This is crucial because it dispels the image of a prim, sheltered woman. She was an active participant in the very social scenes she so brilliantly depicted, observing, absorbing, and experiencing the dynamics firsthand. She wasn't just an observer. She was a participant, which gave her insights a lived authenticity. She was also an avid reader, keeping up with the contemporary literature of her day, constantly engaging with the intellectual currents around her. So, as we reflect on Jane Austen's life and work, what are the key takeaways? First, her journey from a lively, intellectual rectory in Steventon to the quiet determination of Chawton Cottage reveals a profound resilience and unwavering dedication to her craft. Despite early rejections, financial precarity, and the societal constraints placed on women writers, she persisted. Second, her personal life, marked by a singular marriage proposal she rejected for lack of true affection, and a poignant early flirtation that ended due to financial realities, deeply informed her thematic explorations of love versus economic necessity in marriage. She lived the dilemmas her heroines faced, giving her narratives an authentic emotional core. Third, Austen was a literary innovator who transformed the novel. Her mastery of social realism, free indirect discourse, wit, and irony, coupled with her focus on character development and the everyday world, elevated the genre and paved the way for future literary giants. She showed that the domestic sphere was a rich and profound subject for serious literature. Finally, her enduring legacy, evidenced by countless adaptations and her continued popularity, speaks to the timelessness and universality of her themes. The human emotions, social pressures, and journeys of self-discovery she depicted in Georgian England resonate just as powerfully with readers today. She held up a mirror to her society, and in that reflection, we still see ourselves. Jane Austen didn't just write stories, she created worlds, populated by characters who feel as real and as complex as our own friends and neighbors. She taught us to look closely at the 2 inches of ivory, to find the profound in the everyday, and to always value genuine affection above mere convenience. Her work is a testament to the power of observation, the beauty of wit, and the enduring strength of the human heart. And for that, we continue to read, reread, and celebrate her genius. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Jane Austen. Until next time, keep reading, keep exploring, and keep finding the literary landscapes that inspire you.